Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
No, I only got one sheet, but I saw something at the printer.
Yeah, that was mine, but it didn't print it. Well, maybe it did. This. Ah, it did. It printed on the back.
Okay. I'm just seeing that, this doesn't even begin to explain that budget.
Okay. The president said he's 3 minutes away, nobody else is picking up.
Okay.
Oops.
Say 3 minutes
Yeah,
left?
he did call. Oops.
Huh.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Right.
Order tea.
I'll take a tea, actually.
Okay.
Thank you.
Pastor Parker's the host, Councilman Parker's the host there.
How are you doing? It's been so long since we've seen each other.
Yeah.
You should have been waiting today.
My laptop folds over and just.
Did he want you to
I was
start?
thinking about using that.
Because the mayor doesn't want to.
So we need that under here. Yeah. And the question is, who would I have?
You say 3 minutes away.
We have the one that wasn't a little bit.
Yeah, let's exaggerate 3 minutes.
We have an electrician coming in today.
Oh,
Stuff.
traffic.
Do we have an electrician coming in to do other stuff? I mean, it's part of like the EV stuff. Cause this is so.
I mean, I know it's until 5.
I'm usually working to 5.
It's fine.
I had to get time off to do these budget things.
It would be nice to.
What? I have to make time off. That means that I have to stay late or run extremely early.
You gotta take vacation time?
I didn't use it. I just decided to implement my schedule. So, like, days that I'm not meeting, I just work this evening. I like it that way, in case I need on vacation or something.
Yeah.
So I
I had to stop by there.
be trying to preserve that.
I don't know.
There's like 20 people in there.
Yeah, the finance director just did. So I guess I didn't even.
It was.
Yeah. But it must be on.
What is
What
it?
are you doing? On the finance. That's just my update.
It is, because the answer is absolutely no.
Yeah.
It's the small improvement.
Absolutely no.
Updated budget.
Oh, well, this is the budget.
You like one? Oh, I got one. Thank you.
Another way to confuse it.
Thank you.
It's Wednesday?
I don't think we can get any more confused.
Yeah.
Attorney Sharp, you want to water?
Oh, I thought you said you had to get on a train. I was like, where's the train going? I mean, heck if I want to. I could.
And no, that's a good question. No. Right. Nope. I'm retired. No, you may be retired.
If I ever really wanted to. Actually, that is somehow funny.
Dr. Bear, how you doing today?
I am good. How are you, sir?
It is well with myself.
Okay.
Ooh.
That's a good place to be.
We think about planning on looking at everything.
And that's the whole
Ready
budget.
to
Update.
Nicole? Yeah, I want to receive it. Yeah. I need to budget up to it, but I have Michael send me a bit of a package of the bond. Did, no, the, Michael asked this. Tony did,
So, I'm looking, but I do not see is the total number in the law that would take the
No, I think that probably is.
No, he's here. Yeah, that's the president. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Okay. Thank you.
Well, I mean, I only sent it like 20 minutes ago, so.
Thank you. Did you? Okay. She's a cool girl. Okay, good.
The president is here, so. He's coming out.
Going over IT and, oh, here it is. I guess we can use the new one. Yes.
Oh, so the link, so he actually came in.
How you doing, sir?
Good.
How are you?
Okay, yeah, yeah. I think 3 works. I did print off hard copies of what they emailed. Oh yeah, no need. We'll get her in 3. Good afternoon, everybody. I think we're all in position. Apologize for racing here from work. This meeting is called to order at 5:10 p.m. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call, Clerk Doyle.
Carrington,
Present.
Goodman,
Present.
James,
Present.
McGinnis,
Present.
Nicholson,
Here.
Parker,
Here.
Rutherford. Mr. President, you have a quorum.
Quorum being established, can I please have a motion to authorize the excusal of, I almost said Congresswoman, Councilwoman Rutherford from the meeting for personal reasons?
So moved. Support.
Moved by Parker, seconded by Carrington. Hearing no discussion, roll call on that motion. Clerk Doyle.
Goodman,
Yes.
James,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Nicholson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Carrington.
Yes.
6 yeas, no nays.
That motion carries. Is there a motion to approve this afternoon's agenda?
Move by Carrington. Support.
Moved by Carrington, seconded by Parker. Any discussion? Councilman Goodman has identified that the newly elected chair of the Pontiac Charter Revision Commission will likely be able to join us. And as we anticipate, that would be item number 3, other funds as needed. We have previously discussed the Charter Commission budget. Clerk Doyle was very kind to provide us what they, now that they are seated, what they're pursuing as their request departmentally, if you will. And we'll talk about that in item number 3, unless there's other things that shake out. Hearing no further discussion on the approval of the agenda, roll call on that motion. Clerk Doyle.
James,
Yes.
McGinnis,
Yes.
Nicholson,
Yes.
Parker,
Yes.
Carrington,
Yes.
Goodman.
Yes.
6 yeas, no nays.
That motion carries. We are now at various department hearings. Let's do IT, informational technology. We have the whole kit and caboodle in front of us. I do have hard copies specifically of IT if you need it, but I think that's already right here before you. So, administration, you have the floor.
Thank you, President McGinnis. We have incorporated some of the feedback. In fact, I think virtually all of the feedback we received from City Council, which was very, very thoughtful and deliberative, along with some things that we caught ourselves on our end, and built those into some final additional modifications that we're recommending to the budget proposal we put forth. With that general synopsis, I'll turn it over to Deputy Stevens to summarize some of those changes, and I think we'll be joined soon by Finance Director Darren Carrington as well. Deputy?
Thank you, Mayor. So the mayor's comments were referring to the green and white budgets that you have in front of you, but specifically for IT, which is a department that you had not previously actually gone through. I will say that you can see that we are scheduling to no longer be contracting out that department, to be bringing it in-house, and so you can see the salaries and wages instead of us paying a contractor for that. And then you can also see where we have moved, thank you, where we have moved a bunch of activity from previous funds over into IT. So we moved all of our copier cost from other funds and just have that all in IT department, which is where it should actually reside, because they are the ones who actually manage that activity. Other than that, I think the IT budget is a fairly straightforward budget.
In previous fiscal years, what would we have seen? Would this still be seen as a standalone department, if you will? And where would the salaries and wages have been housed?
So it would have been a standalone department, and the salaries and wages would have been housed in the contract cost.
Okay. Oh, I see. Yes, we discussed that in terms of SARCOM is how it's referenced.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
Okay. Other discussion and questions from council about information technology. Are there any looming long-term needs or challenges that we anticipate, not necessarily for this fiscal year, but that we need to look strategically long-term as it relates to information technology, hard costs, soft costs, human resources?
So long-term, there are some things that we're already starting to work on. The biggest of those is really not just putting in place, but actually implementing for lack of a better term, a hardware refresh policy. So far we have just kind of been willy-nilly replacing computers, as needed, as people complain, but really getting ourselves on a true schedule of, every X number of years, we are going to turn over our inventory. Another thing that we are looking at doing and being more strategic about is how we assign computers in general. And what I mean by that is, I previously had...
I'm going to do a point of personal privilege. I'm sorry. Is there a doorbell at the front door of City Hall? It is. I'm hearing a doorbell, and it's possible that the door is locked for a public meeting the public needs to get to. Beating down the door to hear about budget.
Do you know how to actually unlock the door?
Thank you. And so myself as an example. So when I came, I actually had a desktop computer and a laptop computer. And I said, that is redundant. It costs a lot of money, and the city is going to be refreshing both of those computers for me. Instead, if someone is going to be assigned a laptop, they should not get assigned a desktop. They should just get a docking station and a monitor. And so we are long-term, we're working on updating that general policy so that we can be more efficient in our deployment of technology.
Councilman Parker.
Thank you, Brother President. I did have one question, but it's probably, as I looked at it, in this budget, I see for computer equipment itself, you reduced it down to $3,000. You think that's going to be enough for IT?
So, great question. And the answer for that is actually yes, because the individual departments get charged for needing new equipment in their division.
Okay, thank you.
Other discussion? Hearing no Councilwoman James.
I just have one question. Does IT cover the 50th District Court as well? I mean, do they cover IT for 50th District Court?
To an extent, yes. If you can be a little bit more specific with the question, I can answer it. So, for example, the firewall and the actual access out of the court to the internet,
Yeah.
we cover all of that.
Okay. But they have their own IT as well?
I believe they have someone on site who deals with, oh, my computer didn't boot up properly.
Okay. Okay.
But I'm sorry.
All set, Councilwoman James?
Yes.
Councilman Parker.
So, on that question, though, do we replace any of their equipment?
I have to check on that.
Thank you.
Other discussion on information technology? All right, hearing no further discussion, we move now to the parking fund. Deputy Mayor Stevens.
Yes. And so the parking fund, I passed out a memo to all of the council. So if you look at the parking fund, it is broken down into 3 categories: Phoenix Center parking, parking city, and debt service. So Phoenix Center parking, that is the city, even though through the global settlement agreement, which you hear about quite frequently at city council meetings, even though the parking structure itself is under an agreement with the Ottawa Towers, whereby they are actually operating the parking levels of the parking structure, the city is still responsible for maintaining the park or plaza level of that structure. And so the amount of money that you see there is actually the funds that we have set aside to do that type of maintenance work. You also see $850,000 in depreciation. That is depreciation is a non-cash expense, but the city is obligated through generally accepted accounting principles to actually record the value of depreciation of the asset. Moving down to the next category, parking city, you'll see that no funds are currently allocated for that. That is to cover parking enforcement for on-street parking. We currently do not have parking enforcement for on-street parking. We are negotiating a contract now. Once we actually get that negotiated, we will bring back a budget amendment request to reflect the actual cost that we are going to incur for enforcing on-street parking in the downtown. And then finally, you see the category of debt service, which is just under $1 million a year. Again, that goes back to the settlement agreement between the city and the owners of the Ottawa Towers, and the city is obligated to pay approximately $5.8 million over a court period of time, and that is what is reflected here in the debt service.
Understood. Any discussion? Councilman Parker.
I do. I recall back a few months back that you just said we don't have a downtown parking agreement. I thought we were negotiating one a few months back.
So that's a great question. A few months back, we made contact with a company and we gave them some requests, some requirements, and they have just recently, I will say in the past 3 weeks, got back with us with, hey, this is what we are proposing.
Other discussion? Councilwoman James.
Yes, in regards to the Phoenix Center, is there a plan? I know that we still own the amphitheater. is there a plan to reopen? Because some of this cost, is some of this cost related to the amphitheater?
So you're correct. That top portion where it says Phoenix Center parking, that's actually the amphitheater, and the funds that you see there are the funds that we have scheduled to maintain the building. To get to deeper to your question, there are not enough funds here to actually bring that structure back online to actually use on a daily basis. This is just maintenance that is required to keep the asset itself from deteriorating. An example of that would be we have to maintain the grass, and we need to make sure that the drains on that level are properly maintained. Otherwise, the freeze-thaw cycle in the winter would cause extensive damage to the entirety of the structure.
Do we know exactly what the cost is going to be to bring that? Because I was looking at some newspaper articles that said that it did need work to be able to bring it up. Do we know what the cost of that work is? And
We do not.
okay, I guess my concern is that as long as this structure is not available to Pontiac, why is it that as a city, we have so many structures in this city that are unavailable to our residents, and years go by, decades go by, and no decision is made on what are we going to do. This is a beautiful theater up there. It's a beautiful space. It should be utilized. And the least we can do is at least understand what is it going to take to bring it back to where it can be a meaningful part of this city. I just don't think that that's acceptable to say, okay, we're going to maintain it, but it's not, it's really not accessible to Pontiac residents.
So that is a wonderful point, and as we have discussed about the need for an assessment of all of the city's buildings to get a true cost to bring them up to current standards, the park level of the parking deck would be included in that assessment.
So are there currently safety issues where, because I know the previous mayor did use it for some limited activity, are there safety reasons why we could not use that amphitheater?
So I could not answer that question fully. I can say that there is definitely an ADA issue as far as elevator access, but beyond that, I am not certain that there are necessarily safety issues. It just has to be researched.
Well, I gotta say, it's a real painful thing to see what we're confronted with and locked into by previous decisions made, and I know that that's applicable for the executive's office. And I share Councilman James's frustrations. We have heard at the Planning Commission how Tarek Dinha, who is represented himself as essentially the primary owner of Ottawa Towers at this point, has done some sort of stopgap work that's necessary or, would prevent further deterioration of the amphitheater itself. Have we heard from the new or present Ottawa Tower ownership structure that is seeking recompensation for that work, or is that essentially they're wanting to do that as a good faith measure so that way it's beneficial for the utilization of their buildings and the facility arrangements that allow them for parking, et cetera? So the short answer is, are we already getting inquiries or formal requests from Ottawa Towers ownership for what has been at least conveyed or represented as municipal responsibility that they're helping make progress on or help do some maintenance items? Mayor Brimel?
So We haven't fully worked that out, and I do want to acknowledge Councilwoman James's point, which is clearly we need to come up with a comprehensive plan moving forward for the structure as a whole. You know, obviously the parking portion of that structure was leased by the previous council and the previous mayor to the private owners of Ottawa Towers for 100 years. As deputy mayor has explained to council, the previous council and mayor also signed off on a deal by which the city pays the previous owners of Ottawa Towers almost $6 million over a period of time of about 6 years. And that's an enormous amount of money per month, which started being paid back in February, I believe, of this year. And it's very painful for us. You know, I know a number of us expressed concerns about that deal at the time. And now we as elected leaders, all 8 of us as elected leaders, but ultimately the people of Pontiac are left with the consequences of that poor decision making. So it is very painful. We, under the terms of that agreement, as a city, have obligations in terms of maintaining the plaza on the roof of the parking structure and the amphitheater. You're right, President McGinnis, that Tarek Dinha, who is now the sole owner or primary owner of Ottawa Towers after some other previous owners were recently bought out, is my understanding, that he is or has been maintaining the plaza and amphitheater to some degree. I have heard secondhand from city staff that Mr. Dinha has indicated that he's doing that at no charge to the city out of the essentially his generosity. I don't know if he's planning to do that for some time in the future, but apparently his initial indications have been that what he's done to this point is just as a benefit to the community or the city, not because he's expecting compensation for it.
Thank you. A follow-up question. It's very minor, but $325 is the current fiscal year's activity for Phoenix Center project. Do we know what that's referencing? Is it something related to the former mayor's State of the City address, or it's a random and small amount, but I just want to know if it's indicative of something larger that we need to look for in the coming fiscal year.
So in the current fiscal year, I am not certain what that is. Director Caring, Sakar, do you know? No. Okay. So not sure, but as you can see, it is not included in the upcoming fiscal budget.
So when we see building maintenance, 160,000 was what kind of where we're at with this current fiscal year, at least so far. 75,000 is what's earmarked. Is that sort of a placeholder 75,000, or is there explicit action that is tethered to that?
No. So that 75,000 does have explicit action. That is the estimated cost to just maintain the drains and the grass on the park level. It's not the actual cost of going in, fixing the elevator and fixing the bathrooms, rerunning the electrical wire. Those are all things that need to be assessed as to how deep is that actual damage.
And Mayor Grimo, I don't want to go too far over my skis here, but I recall you referencing some pursuit of federal funding as it relates to the Phoenix Center. Did that materialize, or is that materializing at a date uncertain?
It has materialized. I was literally just about to bring this up.
Okay.
We cannot take direct credit for this because this was based on a request put in a year ago by the previous administration. We have put in our own requests for funding with federal government and with Congress people, and some of that is bearing fruit, and we'll hopefully have some news to share about that soon. But in terms of the Phoenix Center, the previous administration put in a request for some funding for improvements to the Phoenix Center. It's a little unclear so far exactly what the available and legal uses are for those funds. But Senator Gary Peters secured $1 million for the Phoenix Center. Again, exactly what the possible appropriate uses are of that $1 million, I think has yet to be fully fleshed out. But we will be receiving $1 million for uses related to the Phoenix Center or other public space downtown.
Well, that's a big deal, and we look forward to further details. Excellent. Councilman Parker, then Councilman Nicholson.
Got a couple of questions. One, somewhere back during the old administration, I thought there was money put aside or devoted to the repair of the elevators in the Phoenix Center. So, Councilman, you may, no? I thought I remember hearing something about
There was
that.
a lot of discussion, remember, in terms of how they wanted, before they entered into the agreement, and as to how they wanted to approach it, because there was discussion of floating bonds and everything else, because there was an assessment done, and the cost, a breakdown of the cost, but they didn't agree to getting the elevators done.
Okay. And is there any monies to be realized by the rental of one of the Ottawa Towers by the Norwegian company?
I don't believe that's the case. I believe there is a Norwegian company that is leasing space in one of the office towers by the name of the Hatchery, I believe, is the name of that Norwegian company. But I'm not sure of the details to that. I don't believe they have an ownership interest, but obviously we collectively are not always privy to behind-the-scenes ownership interest.
Okay.
But to just go a little bit deeper, the city does not receive any income from leasing of the 2 Ottawa towers. And additionally, if the towers sell parking spots, we don't receive money from that either. The only portion of the parking structure that is under our direct control, so that we would receive any revenues from, is the plaza level.
Okay. And then my last question, is there any plans to do anything to the Phoenix Center proper because of the planned or discussion concerning the reworking of Woodward Loop?
The short answer is no. In theory, some changes to the Phoenix Center could be made as part of the reconfiguration of the loop. And when I say in theory, what I mean to say is there could be logical sense to doing something like that. But I think we really would not be able to do anything along those lines at this point without the sign-off of Ottawa Towers, because anything that would impair parking in the Phoenix Center, like changing the configuration of the parking structure or demolishing a portion of the parking structure to reconnect Saginaw Street, anything like that that would impair Ottawa Towers' parking lease would obviously be problematic. And in fact, it was the emergency managers and the then elected mayor's efforts to do things like that in violation of easement rights held by Ottawa Towers that led to this years-long lawsuit that ended up costing the city of Pontiac millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. And so we certainly would not want to go down the road of doing anything to impair this 100-year lease unless we were on very solid ground or unless we had the support and agreement of Ottawa Towers.
Thank you.
Councilman Nicholson.
The repairing of the roof and taking those pieces down, is there additional work that's to be done? I think I remember there was a structural review of the beams.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. We want to make sure that the beams are in good shape. The initial structural review, however, has at least preliminarily indicated that the steel structure is in good shape, as I understand it. So that's good news as well. There's still, I think, processing of the insurance claim for the damage to the canopy itself and for the cost of removing the shreds of the canopy. So we'll keep you posted as we learn more about the outcome of that insurance claim. The question moving forward is, do we maintain the steel superstructure there and put up a new canopy over it, or is some other roof structure a more sensible approach moving forward? So that would be one of the questions to be determined by the overarching assessment that Councilwoman James wisely said we should do.
Thank you.
Others that wish to be recognized? So, obviously with a federal earmark or federal appropriation, that would change the game as it relates to the Phoenix Center building maintenance possibilities, with many caveats added to that. What would be helpful to me is to understand, we're seeing the beginning and ending fund balance. Is that real life? Am I looking at that, with the mayor's recommended budget, that there's in the parking enterprise fund almost $7.7 million, or is that a misinterpretation on my part? How should I understand what's going on with the parking enterprise fund? Is it semi-standalone or not?
So I think you touched on pretty much all the relevant points there. The direct answer to your question is that fund balance that you see reflected there is an accurate number, but in peeling it back is not comparable to, say, general fund, because this does involve some fixed assets within the mix there.
Okay, that's good to know.
So I can put together probably a more relevant breakdown, but it's not as if it's all liquid in terms of just cash available in cash and liquid assets.
We may not need to have that for this juncture of the budget process, but that'd probably be really illuminating, especially when we get a clearer sense of the timing and restrictions on federal appropriations, to know what elements we're dealing with.
Agreed, and I would encourage you, Director, to provide a breakdown to council and for us in the mayor's office how the stated on paper assets in the parking fund work. That is to say, what actually makes up that paper figure of that level of assets. Because if it's not all liquid or not all cash, and some of it is in fixed assets, we should know what those fixed assets are. And longer term, as we stare this almost $6 million liability in the face that the previous mayor and council put in place, we need to know how much liquid assets are in the parking fund to cover that. Because to the extent that those liquid assets in the parking fund won't cover that and will run out in the next year or whenever, we need to start making plans and preparing for the eventuality that the city's going to have to come up with the funds to pay for that almost $6 million liability from other sources. So I think having a sense of exactly what comprises that paper figure of whatever it is, $7 million in the parking fund, is very, very important. And while it's probably not essential for purposes of approving the budget in the next 10 days or 2 weeks, whatever timeline we're on for that, it is something that I think we want sooner rather than later.
We had asked prior, and Director Carrington, if you have the information, Phoenix Center projects, $325 was booked at least so far this fiscal year. Very minute, but I just want to make sure we're not missing some element. Do we know what those expenses are pertaining to for Phoenix Center projects? Kind of an ambiguous category, and I just want to make sure we're not missing a need that's not booked elsewhere. Okay. Pro Tem Carrington, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you, President McGinnis. Just wanted to go back to, the mayor stated that we have to pay out how much yearly to, based on the settlement agreement?
It's $978,477.
Up to 6 million? Is what
Just under.
Just under 6 million?
5.8. 5.85.
5.8. All right. Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to get that number clarified.
I see pension expense GERS with Parking City. Is that related to those who retired out of working for parking in past decades? I know we're no longer structuring it that way, but just trying to get a sense.
Yeah, so that was something that the auditors put on our books last year. We're not sure going forward with the changes in the healthcare if we're going to be required to reflect that going forward. It's really an item that is a function of the audit, and we're working on getting a better handle on exactly what the treatment is going to be under some of the recent accounting standards.
Others that wish to have the floor? Mayor and Deputy Mayor, of the remaining obligations and assets of the municipality, is the Phoenix Center the biggest albatross, or are there bigger albatrosses around our neck?
I missed the first part of that. In terms of buildings and capital improvements, or just broader issues writ large?
I'm just thinking those that would be perceived as assets but are, obligations. So you can look at it very broadly.
Yeah. I mean, I would say the Phoenix Center is in a class of its own when it comes to that category, which is, I know that there have been people who have spoken of it as an asset, and there are aspects to that structure that are assets if you look at some portion of the structure as a whole. But overall, I would say that the structure as a whole is clearly a liability. And that was the case, frankly, even before this 10-year legal saga and horrible settlement agreement occurred. There were enormous deferred maintenance expenses that the city had and was facing for that structure. And that's true even before it was closed, even before the electrical was stripped, even before there was vandalism to it. And it was true even before this horrible settlement agreement obligated the city to pay $6 million to the previous owners of Ottawa Towers. Now that all of those things have come into play, it's clearly as a whole a liability for the city. And and of course part of that is that whereas 10 years ago the city could use it for parking, which we have a very serious need for downtown, the city now has no ability to utilize it for parking. A private entity can utilize it for parking as needed, but the city no longer has the ability to use it for public parking. The only remaining aspect to the facility that has any asset potential is the amphitheater on the roof of the parking structure. But even there, it requires an enormous amount of upgrades to really be usable. The deputy mayor talked about ADA compliance and making sure that it has a working elevator for disabled participants or patrons who might visit it. But there are a lot of other upgrades that are needed. And of course, it's always been an awkward arrangement as a public venue, just based on it being raised several stories off street level. So if you think about what public spaces and parks tend to be more amenable to public use, and as a commons area that creates a sense of space and community, a street level public square would generally be much more amenable than a 3-story high space that has a visible physical barrier to public participation. Having to walk up giant flights of stairs, having a giant concrete facade that is not aesthetically pleasing, are not aspects you would generally today design as amenable to a sense of community, a publicly accessible and aesthetically pleasing space.
Other discussion on the Parking Enterprise Fund. Councilman James.
Well, I don't disagree with you, Mayor Grimel, but I do think that, you know, in terms of our city wanting to change and move forward, we have got to stop delaying decisions. And if we really consider that building as being a liability, then we need to be looking at, you know, can the building be sold? We need to be looking at what are the options open to us. What we can't do is continue to allow these spaces to sit dormant. You know, we've got community centers that have been closed for 10, 20 years. We just allow things to sit dormant like, you know, nobody else does this. I'm sorry. Nobody else does this. And we can't continue to do it. So we've got to make a decision. If we think it's too much of a liability for the city to try to maintain, what are the other options? What do they look like? Because we need to talk about it. But what we can't do is just do nothing, pay our bills, and the residents of this city have no access to that building. We're constantly paying for things that we get absolutely nothing out of. And that's a real concern. So just my thoughts on that.
Thank you. Councilman Grimel. Mayor Grimel and then Councilman Nicholson.
I completely agree with every single word you said.
Well, that was brief.
The potential new relationship with the parking enforcement, do we imagine that the revenue will offset the expense, or do we imagine there will be an additional expense that we'll see coming after, but when we negotiate that and have that more?
Just from what I've been able to see, there is a very real chance that the revenue will slightly eclipse the expense. But we're by no means expecting it to be an actual revenue center.
Great, thank you.
Others who wish to have the floor. All right, we welcome further information on the Parking Enterprise Fund, but for the sake of time, let's move now to other funds, which is essentially our opportunity. If there's any funds that we didn't explicitly talk about or other already, the first that we have touched upon, but there have been substantial developments since, is for the Charter Commission. So not only have the voters spoken, they have had their first and chosen the 9 commissioners. The commission had their first meeting on Monday evening, elected council leadership, commission leadership, and they also reviewed the budget where it stands. So with that, I'd like to give a warm Pontiac City Council welcome to Madam Chairwoman of the Pontiac Charter Revision Commission, Tamika Ramsey. Feel free to take the podium. Give us a sense of what the needs are in early phase, but what's been identified and the vision for the resources that you're seeking.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you once again, President McGinnis. So our budget increased, I think, 3-fold from the one that we were given. And a lot of this was simply because we could not itemize exactly how much things would cost. And so we are here to negotiate. I'm here to negotiate. So one of the most important things is right off bat, the personnel services is the deputy city clerk who will be at all of our meetings. So we understand that needs to be here. We have increased the budget in printing, training expenses, professional services, marketing, events, and postage. Once again, we don't know how much postage cost. And so we set a really big number because we don't know. We do want to make sure, I think our primary goal in this budget is to make sure that we are doing education and outreach every step of the way with the charter and not just at the end, because we feel that will be a disservice to the residents. And so most of our budget is geared towards mailing to the city residents, doing town halls and educational meetings, but just reaching the residents.
Pro Tem Carrington.
Thank you, President McGinnis. Good afternoon.
Good evening.
Actually, it is evening now. Professional services, you requested 25,000, but you also requested 15,000 as other service and charges for legal services. And could you tell me the difference in those particular areas?
Yes. So the professional services would be expert matters in issues that we know we would have to address. We know that marijuana is going to be a really big issue. None of us are experts on that. We also wanted to make sure that if any training was needed for the commissioners, that was accessible. Legal services, so I think we also wanted to have maybe an attorney who knows about charters, that is not necessarily the city attorney. And we feel that because in legal services, we can only pay the city attorney, that we put that cost in professional services.
Mayor Grimel.
Well, thank you for being here, Chairwoman Ramsey,
Yes,
first of
course.
all. I have mixed feelings, and there's some sticker shock here, but I'm broadly sympathetic and in agreement with the idea of soliciting community input throughout the process, communicating with the community throughout the process. So I think in terms of that big picture goal, I agree, and obviously some of that costs money. So, I think it's worth having a conversation about some of the specific ideas and trying to put some numbers in terms of pricing with those items. I had the same question about the professional services and the legal services, and I'm wondering a little bit what a reasonable and realistic combined figure is there, because if we're really talking a little bit about both, that being related to legal services, we may be being a little redundant there. I also wonder, when we talk about expertise in marijuana, I'm not sure I fully understand. This is really my question, because I know I haven't really been asking one so far, but this is really my question. Do you see marijuana, to use your example, being a charter issue? And if so, what would the charter say about marijuana? I don't normally think of specific policy areas as being articulated in the charter, with some exceptions, but generally I don't think of the charter as speaking directly to a specific policy area, as specific as marijuana, say.
Thank you for that question. There were a couple of commissioners who brought it up, thinking that marijuana would be a part of the charter. In my opinion, if nothing else, community benefit agreements would be a part of the charter. And so getting some assistance and expertise in that, I would have to ask those commissioners specifically about marijuana, because I don't have the answer for that.
Goodman, then Carrington, and then Park.
And I'd also like to just make the point that when it comes to that, we do have to remember that Michigan is not the nicest state when it comes to local and municipal rules and changes and laws.
Oh, no, that's right.
So making sure that we also have someone helping them figure out, in case there's something that we actively want to do, someone who is knowledgeable of knowing the workarounds to possibly do the things that may be preempted in the standard way. And making sure that they are capable of doing that because we want them to be able to make the city as best as they can. I understand your absolute shock with it, and it's a large number, but making sure that they are the best equipped to really give us, the city and the citizens, what they want when it comes to a charter, I think is paramount at this point after really 30 years.
Carrington?
I definitely agree with my colleagues. I think that we're trying to look for realistic numbers, though. For example, I don't necessarily think marijuana is the issue of the Charter Commission. But I definitely think that you guys need legal advice from watching the last Charter Commission, where I know someone came in and they done it pro bono. So in a sense, $35,000. What would you think would be a good number to cover both of those particular areas?
I would have to do some research, but Commissioner Payne, while we were up there, looked in for an attorney who practiced charter law in the state of Michigan. It was anywhere from $175 to $300 an hour. And so once again, as we are working with these individuals to make sure that we are on track and making sure things are legal along the way, we would want to make sure that we had somebody who was an expert to help us with that. We can, and I want to acknowledge the sticker shock because I also had it. I think many of us had it. The problem was we don't know what to expect. We don't know what postage look like. We don't know how many homes we're going to mail to how many times. And what we didn't want to do is to ask for a little bit and be under and not able to do some things that we thought were vital to this process for the first year, then saying we need this much and then negotiating down. I should have done a little bit more research to get at least the postage, because $50,000 for postage is a lot, to get some of that down. But once again, it is how much does postage cost and how many times are we mailing to homes in Pontiac?
Councilman Parker?
Well, certainly I was kind of shocked at the amount, but it was my understanding, though, that I thought some of the expenses for the Charter Commission would also be covered by the clerk's office or in that area of expertise.
So no. So we would have our own budget. We would use some of our funding because now we're using the deputy clerk who is no longer doing 100% election work. So we would also cover some of her salary because we would be using her time.
Okay. And help me understand, and I know the post office has certainly got beyond expensive, $50,000, exactly what?
Well,
gonna be mailed?
Well, we once again we threw that number out because we don't know how much postage is and how many times that we would send postage out. So if we say we're gonna do 5 mailings over the year, then I can get a price for that, and then we would do 5 mailings for the year. And if it wasn't enough, then next year we can come in front of you and ask for more. But this was a very I don't know. I used to ask my daddy for more money than I needed because I always knew he was going to talk me down, type of budget. So we want to make sure that we have everything that we need or close to it, so that we can do our job right the first time.
What's your target vision for the timeline? I know that per state law, you have an X number of years that sort of a viable window. This budget to me looks like you're trying to get it all done this fiscal year.
That's a possibility. We have not had these conversations in depth. We only met the first time. Our next meeting is July the 7th at 6 p.m. But our goal is to use the basis of the 2012 charter and work off of that. It was approved by the state already, so we know that it's good. And just going through it to see like what residents had issues with and how we can adjust it. So we are hoping a year and a half at the most, but we are trying to make sure that this is a expedited process.
Thank you. My next question is for the clerk. The clerk's office has built out, I think, a very substantial proactive approach when it comes to informing residents about upcoming elections and sort of what's the nature of the elections, which is even more important when it's not the standard, general election or primary election in a presidential or governor's year. So, for example, leading up to the charter commission election, the work that you did mailing to households, is it your intention, not necessarily for this fiscal year, but when there is a charter proposal election component for the voters, is that something you already were prospectively looking to build into your communications to registered voters in the city of Pontiac, or that's sort of a wait and see because it may be a year and a half, could be 2 years from now?
Mr. President, it would just be the election. So whatever proposal that the charter commissioners come up with at that point. But I think Commission Chairperson Ramsey was reflecting, getting input throughout, in essence, the process. So the clerk's office would not be doing mailings as they're going throughout the process.
Right.
It would be pretty much whatever the final product that they've come up with, just informing voters that there's an election about that. And then on that point, there, unless the Charter Commission gets finished by November, which may be too short of a time frame, the city does not have an election year next year. So if they actually did put forth something, that would be additional cost for the city because we will be incurring the cost of a special election. It's a non-election year for the city. So I just wanted to bring that point up.
Understood. And I do think it is one of the larger challenges, not for like individual charter revision questions, but when it's sort of there, to yes or no, the voters, do you adopt this charter proposal? The ballot isn't telling you all the enumerated changes. That there's a great deal of voter education that will come, even if we're not necessarily advocating how you should vote. That'll be an important element that we need to plan for as we get a better sense of when that might fall on the calendar. So I do think the clerk's office will be a very excellent resource, you know, sort of in terms of the way in which you've been honing that process and you know, refining the way in which you are communicating to registered voters in the city of Pontiac about what's coming up, not only how they can access their right to vote and voter information and voting locations, but the substance of what's before them. We see that with school millages, right? You know, that they begin, you know, sending out a lot of communications when there's a complex, large ballot question, because it can be convoluted. I think that this will be a question that we want to help the Charter Commission convey and communicate, presuming, you know, you're not required. You know, there could be a chance you don't bring a recommendation forward, although that's the working expectation. Other discussion?
But those items should come out of the Charter Commission budget as opposed to the clerk's
Got it.
budget.
And just for and I appreciate that clerk letting us know that I feel it's very important to get as many residents out as possible. I think a special election would do us a disservice because people would not get out to vote. And so I think we can look at this budget as a 2-year budget and slow that process down. This budget was really like, the fear was that people would just get charter fatigue, and just disengage. And so we wanted to try to get through it while engaging citizens as quickly and proficiently as possible. But if there is not a city election next year, then that does give us time for us to do the work and not quickly.
Other discussion? Hearing no further discussion, thank you very much, Chairwoman Ramsey, and congratulations on your election by the people of Pontiac, but then also your election by your colleagues.
Thank you.
Yes.
We will, through the next 2 days, obviously assess further in terms of where the council wants to land or what our next steps are in terms of coming to those items we want to bring in the overall budget. Go for it, yes.
I feel like it would be in our best interest to resubmit something to give you more workable numbers and maybe have more itemized and broken down by tomorrow. Would that be okay?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if you want to give more context on what those line items would encompass, I think that would be very illustrative for us.
And who would I send that to? The clerk?
The clerk can handle it, or I can handle it on behalf of the council, whatever is most conducive.
I'll do both. Thank you.
Hearing no further discussion on that other fund, are there, Mayor and Deputy Mayor, Finance Director Carrington, were there other funds or pots of gold that you wanted to make sure we didn't overlook or gloss over before we start getting into some other considerations?
Director Carrington, I believe that with the addition of the parking fund, which we did go over today, that we've covered all of the major funds. Certainly.
We did tiptoe around Tifa's previously, but I don't recall the S word, so hit us.
Yeah. So do you have those numbers in front of you? Okay. So Director Carrington will actually go over the numbers. I'll just give you the background of it. So TIFAs are tax increment finance authorities. Essentially, if you've ever heard of a DDA, Downtown Development Authority, is a very specialized TIF district. The way it works is the taxes are set at a base year. So let's just say 2010. So however much money was collected in that area in 2010, and for I like simple math, we'll say $100 of taxes was collected in 2010 in that particular area. A development goes in, and after that development goes in, the total amount of taxes that are collected are now $110. That $10 is captured by the TIF district to be put back into projects in that district. And so what most municipalities do is they don't spend that $10. They take the value or the projected value of that $10 and they use it to go out and leverage debt. So they pass bonds. And hopefully the cost of those bonds does not exceed the $10. And very, very hopefully you end up bringing in $11. So not only do you pay those bonds, but you have a little bit of extra money. Unfortunately, what happened with the city of Pontiac is that we over-leveraged ourselves. And so the amount
They over-leveraged themselves.
Well, we're all in this together now.
Yeah.
So in the past, it was over leveraged. And so we ended up having TIF districts where that the cost of the bonds exceeded the cost of the tax increment. And so that is what Director Carrington will be going over with you. What is that subsidy? What is that difference? But additionally, I can say happily that we only have a few more years of this structure, at which point the bonds will be paid off completely and those funds will be returning to the city of Pontiac's general fund. Director Carrington?
And then it's the whiz with Can You Feel a Brand New Day?
Well, I do just, I do, good reference. But I do just want to drill down on that last point a little bit. And Mr. Carrington, maybe you can speak to this. But I had thought that maybe one of the bonds would be paid off in a few years, but that one of the bonds for another TIFA district would take a longer time
Correct.
period to pay off. So I want to make sure I don't want to raise hopes too much that a few years from now, we're not going to be talking about previous decisions made by other elected officials, to emphasize your point, President McGinnis, no longer being an issue, because I think they will still be an issue, and that the city is still legally obligated to subsidize a TIF district beyond just a few years from now. So please speak in specifics about the different TIF districts, the bonds in play, and the amount of the subsidy, and for how long the city's on the hook to do it.
Sure. Good evening, Council. I didn't provide greetings earlier. So just wanted to highlight this because I think there was a question earlier about kind of any obligations or assets or things that may be out there that are drains, if you will, on the general fund or potential drains on the general fund. And I think this kind of highlights, not a weakness of the city, but just in terms of some areas that are areas that are particularly I think, important when you look at the city's overall financial structure, which is very strong, but there are certain things that are relevant today based on decisions that were made several years ago and things, and just in terms of the way things have kind of evolved from an economic and financial standpoint. So this, we have, the city has, relatively speaking, a low amount of debt that's out there. There's two current bond issues. We refer to it as TIFA 2 and TIFA 3 bonds. And then there's the debt tied to the Phoenix Center. So that's really the only true debt that the city has. The TIFA 2 and the TIFA 3 bonds, as was explained, was initially designed where that debt service would be covered by the TIFA districts, the revenues from the captures from the TIFA districts. As the property values decreased, the amount of taxes generated from that district fell, and the tax capture is no longer able to cover the debt service, and that's where the general fund is needing to step in and provide that subsidy. So we are required to budget for that. The way that the debt was structured, it was structured in a way that the capture district would pay for it, but that the city was pledging its faith and credit as kind of a fallback. And now we're, as we have been for some time, we are in that fallback stage. And so, it's an area that I think is important. One, it shows that, there's several $100,000 that are going out of the general fund to pay for this. But there is somewhat of the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, because once that ends, then those monies will no longer be required to go outside of the general fund, and they can stay in the general fund for some other purpose. I'm looking at the document that we passed out today.
Yeah.
And on page, starting on page 71.
But previously, it was in Department 690 redevelopment and housing, right? Contribution to TIFA
Correct.
2 and TIFA 3.
Yes.
What we were looking at in projected activity for this year is that TIFA 2, the contribution was $303,000, and the contribution to TIFA 3 is $680,000, rounding up.
Yes.
TIFA 2, so that way we can mentally connect it with tangibly what it meant. Which one's the Center Point Marriott?
TIFA 2.
And what was TIFA 3?
TIFA 2.
TIFA District 2 is a very expansive district. It actually it covers all of downtown and stretches over to the Center Point Marriott area. TIFA District 3 is essentially the housing development at Stonegate.
And TIFA 3 is the one that will linger longer?
I believe so.
Yeah, and I didn't bring my full binder. I'm going to get that and give you the exact information in terms of the timing and the remaining debt service on each of these. But
and if I could too, Mr. Carrington, as you look into that history and put it together for the council, I think it would be helpful as well if you can identify to the best of your ability the bond or bonds, plural, depending on the situation, in each of the TIFA districts and what those bonds paid for at the time, just so we have a sense of the history here and why these enormous loans were borrowed by the city at the time.
Okay. Yeah, so for that, I'll bring that information tomorrow. I'll pull up the official statement for those.
And a related housekeeping item, these districts essentially still exist, correct? So there are still boards that are required to meet, et cetera?
So the districts still exist. My understanding is that the emergency manager caused them to be sunset, so that once the bond payments were paid, that they would cease to exist, and the sunsetting also was supposed to stop them from being able to incur any new debts if we had growth to the point where it's like, oh, we've got additional revenues again. We can. My understanding is that the emergency manager sunset them, and that is why we are not having active TIFA board meetings.
So 29 shows where it was this fiscal year, and page 71, starting on 71, you were sharing is where it'll be housed as proposed for this fiscal year.
Correct. And we just moved it out of economic development because essentially it was it's just money coming from the general fund, and having a large subsidy coming out of economic development for a project that was not a current economic development project. We wanted to make sure that the department was actually representing what was happening and not just legacy debts.
The ghosts of economic development past. But so we call this 231, we're calling this the transfer out fund, or what are we?
It's,
no, that's 70. Okay.
So it's Fund 239. The Fund 239 is the TIFA number 2 fund.
Okay, I got it now.
Yep.
Page 73 for us.
And so you can see on the revenue side how much is still being captured in terms of, for each of the 2 funds. So if you look at, and I'm going to go over to TIFA number 3 on page 75 of the current handout, and you see under their current property taxes, you see that TIFA number 2 is able to capture some revenue from the from the captured district. Again, it's just not enough to cover the debt service, and that's where the need for the general fund subsidy comes into place. You see the revenues that are being generated for TIFA number 3. We see a total revenues that are being budgeted of $2.3 million. And if you turn the page, you see the debt service for that is closer to 2.8 or $2.9 million. So that difference on page 77, you see the amount of debt service that's required. The difference between the revenue for TIFA 3 and the debt service, which is basically all of the expenses in that for that fund, is the subsidy that the general fund is having to cover on behalf of that fund, or on behalf for those bonds.
Discussion on the TIFA funds.
And just wanted to point out in terms of how much is remaining. So for TIFA number 2, we have after the current fiscal year, we will have 2 more fiscal year obligations remaining. So we will pay that debt off in 2024, and the amount that was originally issued under that was a little more than $3.2 million, about $3.3 million for TIFA number 2. TIFA 3, which was the larger of it, both of these were initially issued in 2007, but TIFA 3 will not be paid off until 2031. And we had initially the $24.45 million was initially generated from that. And we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 9 years remaining on the debt service for.
You're welcome, District 2. Other TIFA discussion.
So basically, it's we have 3 TIFAs, 1, 2, and 3.
I believe 2 and 3 are the.
2 and 3. Okay.
So
Disappeared already.
Okay, that's good. And you say these began in what, 2007?
The bonds were issued in 2007. And so if you look at it from a timing standpoint, it's pretty much before the downturn in real estate, which I think was the biggest impact on the ability to meet the debt service with the captures from this fund.
I'm going to ask a potentially uncomfortable question for all of us. Is the amount of interest or debt service that's being generated, one, with the Phoenix Center, and then two, with the TIFAs, is it better for cash flow just to keep staying on our payment plan, or do we want to pay it down quicker and say, because I mean that Phoenix Center, what was that, $150,000 based on that was us not paying it. It grew, the total grew by $158,000. Just a cost benefit question broadly in terms of our painful debts.
Another thing to keep in mind, we do record these general fund subsidies, and we've talked about this in Councilman Nichols, in the committee of Councilman Nichols, James, and Parker. We do record anytime we make a subsidy, so the funds are carrying a due to the general fund, and so to the extent that these things are paid off and they're able to, in the instance of TIFA 2, start capturing some funds, or in the instance of TIFA 3, several years down the road when they pay it off, and if they can continue capturing funds, those monies would be owed back to the general fund. We are carrying that as a due to, or due to the general fund for all those monies that have been paid on behalf of these two TIFA funds.
Any further TIF discussion? Other funds that you'd like to flag for us, or you think that covers it?
Director Carrington, did we miss any?
I think we parking, the TIFA, I think those were the.
We've talked about the idea that we allocate money from each department to cover insurance, right? And so, if I'm correct, the total insurance cost is just over $7 million for the city.
Yes.
And I don't think that there's anything else that we haven't
We kick out.
talked about.
We pay $7 million a year on insurance.
Insurances, yes.
Man, that's painful. So, was there anything from city council members of budgets that we didn't adequately address content? Hearing none, where we are next is for the executive team to share with us changes that were not initially proposed or discussed, and flag for us where we would find that, and for us to say, is there consensus with that, or do we need to flag and set aside that before we ink that in, we want to set that aside and bring that up as an amendment. On the idea is that we will have a first reading on the budget June 14th, which is this coming Tuesday night, and then a second. Yes, Clerk Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. President. So in the past, the budget has always been adopted as an emergency ordinance, which means that it can be adopted on the same day.
Okay.
That you vote. So just for clarification. Thank you.
That'll be helpful in terms of what's required. We are going to, the intention at this point is that we, at our regular meeting of the City Council on June 14th, where the formal budget will be reviewed and amendments voted on, and then June 21st, we'll look at it again, sort of like a second reading, and then do further amendments there. But we have the flexibility, if all amendments have been thoroughly addressed, it could be voted on as early as June 14th, but I just anticipate there might be the need to have two, and it'll be the focus of both of our regular meetings on the 14th and 21st. But it all depends on what's the volume and what's the nature of how much debate is discussed. With that, was that a question, Councilwoman James?
I didn't hear what the clerk said.
He was saying that essentially we'd be deciding it as an emergency action, so it would not be required to have two readings. So it's not like we're handcuffed that we must wait two council meetings to do it. We could, in theory, do it at one council meeting, which especially is important if we were really under the gun, getting close to the end of the fiscal year. So all of the work that you've been putting into this process is hopefully providing enough landing space and room to accommodate that we will not have those sort of, in a case of emergency, break the glass. We got to vote now. We got to vote before, these dates certain. Did I cover that okay, Clerk Doyle? Thank you very much, Legislative Council.
Actually, the budget must be adopted at least 1 week before the start of the new fiscal year.
Okay.
By charter.
So theoretically, June 23rd.
Correct. Yep.
Ish. And are there any other posting requirements that you will have as the clerk's office? We've satisfied that with the public hearing and got it. So, administration, there may be many, but let us know what tweaks you've been tweaking.
So they are actually more than can be easily enumerated to as far as drawing your attention to each page. But what I will say is that what we have passed out to you today are all of the changes, and we actually changed the format to make it a little bit easier to keep your eyes on one line. And you have a column that says Mayor's Recommended Budget. So that is the column that was originally given to you. And then you have Adopted Early Budget. So the Adopted Early Budget, if you compare that line or that column to the previous column, you will be able to see any changes that were made. Essentially, we took the feedback from all of the sessions that we've had so far, and we try to incorporate that feedback. We also made changes, as the mayor pointed out, that we had caught during those processes ourselves. An example of a change that we had caught during those processes were that we had not included the overall director for the newly created Parks and Rec division, right? So we had the actual park manager and the senior manager and the youth manager, but we did not have the director of that overall division incorporated. We also had not included the 3% raises for some of our employees that we wanted to give across the board. So all of that has been changed and incorporated into here, and so you will see that as you go through.
Page 5 is the first I see any deviation, and that first is salaries and wages for charter commissions, so that would show that the deputy city clerk is it's reflecting that pay increase.
Exactly.
So what I'm doing is just blazing through with my eyeballs. Again, salaries and wages is the only thing so far in the mayor's department changes. Yep, on page 6. Other professional services change from 20,000 to 40,000 in the mayor's office. Do you recall what that references?
Yeah, so that references funds to hire a lobbying firm so that the city can be more proactive with the state and federal government as far as grants and appropriations.
Love it. That's something that you've shared with us, the mayor's and team has shared with the city council previously. Are there any strong concerns from council on that? We keep moving down.
Just want to make sure that.
Yep.
Just want to make sure that I'm reviewing these columns right. So the mayor recommended budget
Was like what we saw weeks ago, what he provided to us May 1st-ish. And then the final column is what they're bringing to us today, incorporating the changes that have come through our budget sessions.
Okay. And you said the 20,000, the increase in the
On
20.
page 6, yep, 20,000 to 40,000 is them reflecting a lobbyist on behalf of the city of Pontiac to advocate for greater funding from state and other levels of government.
Okay.
And the mayor identified that as a strong need because, especially with federal funds that the state's got billions with a B, that they're determining how to fund, how we can scale that up and Pontiac not left, with this unique funding opportunity, Pontiac not left out of the equation. That's, I think, are going to be really helpful. Also, when it even comes to the county, might not be as, because we have a lot of inroads to the county, we probably are in pretty strong standing with that, but County Commissioner Powell has shared with the council leadership that there's receptivity for when we are doing some American Rescue Plan funding decisions, that there might be match opportunities from the county. So I don't necessarily think that the lobbyist would need to go into the weeds with the county because of the strong relationship we have. Are you envisioning that the lobbyist is state and federal, or just state?
Well, I think our initial thought was probably just state, but oftentimes some of the state lobbying firms can do some federal work as well. I think, frankly, 20,000 may not be enough, but we'll see what the RFP process shows. So we'll find out. But it's not unusual for I don't know how much, say, the city of Detroit spends for a lobbyist, but it would not surprise me if they spent in the millions of dollars for a lobbyist, to put that in perspective. So
Because they have even more federal, sort of going after federal funding as well.
potentially, and I suspect, but I'm not sure, that the last time the city of Pontiac had a lobbyist, which goes back some time now, 15 years, maybe a little longer than that, it would not surprise me if the city of Pontiac spent six figures for a lobbyist. So we'll see what's out there, and it's important, obviously, to have a placeholder in place, and we'll see what the RFP process reflects. But a good lobbyist, even if they cost substantial amounts of money, can, of course, more than pay for that several times over, obviously.
I'll ask a potentially tasteless question. Is it more painful for you to have a slightly higher amount now versus drawing a lot of attention with a budget amendment midway through the fiscal year to say, hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is what we're doing with this slice of dough?
Probably better to have a higher number now than later, if it would be my gut. Obviously, ultimately, any contract would have to come before council to be approved anyway.
Might as well keep it how it is and let the contract process.
That probably makes sense.
Yeah. Pro Tem Carrington?
Yes, I don't know. It's an item I seen where training went from $1,500 to $12,000.
Yeah, that's an easy explanation. So
Which page?
Page 9.
Okay.
In every department, whatever you see for training, if you divide that number by 4,000, that will tell you how many individuals are in that department. And so that was a clerical oversight before. Every training line should be $4,000 per employee in that area.
And it's all the more important there since we're scaling up this area, so it's expanding what exists. So it's not just training current folks. There's going to be new folks on the ground.
Correct. Yeah. That number is based on anticipated headcount.
I'm going through. I'm now at page 18.
Seeing changes.
Are we gonna go by page?
All I'm doing is going by every change.
Yeah.
And so you've gone through to.
I'm at 43, and the only changes were with salary and training, and the same two scenarios.
So the last change that we had was training for income tax administration on page 9, and that's gone from 1,500 to 12,000, and they're sharing. That was just a calculation oversight. So that's the last material change until we get to page 43. The only other deviations.
I wanted to ask about 16. The salaries and wages went from 92 to 127, and I was wondering about that one.
Fair question, yes. So
Page
that looks like it's
16.
beyond just 3%. 16, building maintenance, salaries and wages.
Maintenance, salaries, and wages. That was from employees who got left off of the chart. So that was actually an increase in the number of employees in that division.
Okay.
Good catch, Councilwoman. Councilman Nicholson, what are we looking at for page 43?
I'm saying that's as far as I was.
Oh,
I'm all the
okay,
way to
sorry.
50 now and still in the
If
same.
I could,
Yep.
I think it bears, in order to be fully transparent, it bears stating, which specific employees were left off the chart in the building and maintenance category.
One of them was a maintenance supervisor, and
Yeah, so we added several employees within Public Works Department, and then based on the allocation that we're using, that's why you see the increase. So it wasn't so much just adding a standalone employee, but it was adding employees to the Department of Public Works, and many of those employees are allocated on a percent basis based on their job and the estimated time that they're expected to spend. And so when we added those positions, the allocations that we're using increased the amount of salaries for that particular department.
So these were people who were added into other apartments,
They-
into other departments, but part of their salary would come out of maintenance.
Yeah, specifically DPW. That
Yeah.
a lot of those employees are spread over multiple departments.
Okay.
Page 44, professional services, CN Railway, under traffic control, wasn't included in the initial recommended budget. It shows up now, and I think that's probably driven in part by the projected activity that's manifested. What do we know?
Yeah, so we incur an annual charge for railway maintenance. I believe it's one of the railway companies, but they charge us every year for just an annual maintenance charge, and so we did not have that included originally. So we added that into the.
Good catch. Page 47, I show Public Works Operations, admin, 101 admin allocation, 2 other funds. What should we know about that? There was nothing in the recommended budget, and now it's 143,000, which obviously tracks closely to projected activity. What does that represent? Sure, it is page 47.
Yeah, so this is Fund 203. This is the Major Streets Fund. I'm sorry, local street funds. Fund 203 is our local streets. And that 143 reflects an administrative allocation coming out of general fund. Did not have that included in the original. It's basically an overhead allocation that we do to all of the other funds outside the general fund, tied to the administrative costs that the general fund is incurring.
Got it. Page 53, I see $13,000 now appears under recreation facility medical insurance. I think that was Councilman Parker that might have caught that. But also MERS employer contributions. It's now manifested with 7,600. So that's just mapping out that which should have been there for the employees related to recreation. Page 53.
which expense?
Page 53, 208-756-716-000, medical insurance, $13,000. Previously, there was 0, and then MERS employer contributions a few lines down. There was
Right, that would be correct.
7,600. Okay. Pro Tem Carrington?
It's a quick question. What page you're on?
That last one I was on was 53.
Okay, I'll wait until 55.
Okay. 55.
Actually, I know you guys didn't allocate anything to city events. So was that a
Did you move
fund?
that to mayor's office
Yes, I was
instead
just about to
of
ask
just
that.
a standalone city events? What was the intention or vision?
Yeah, so this is the Youth Recreation Fund. And so, there was a small charge that was there. And we just didn't have any expectation that was going to be incurred by that fund going forward. So there is a city events tied to the general fund, but this is specifically for the Youth Recreation Fund in Millage.
All right, thank you.
Page 58, cemetery, Ottawa Park, salaries and wages, looks like it went up more than any kind of small percentage increase. Was that just a further understanding of what the real deal is with Ottawa Park salary and wages, or what are we looking at?
So that would be tied again to the additional DPW workers and the amount percent that are allocated to the cemeteries.
And I'm sorry.
Yes, Councilwoman James, and then Pro Tem Carrington.
I noticed we still have the Williams International Educational Fund still under recreation. Did we say we were going to move that, or are we just going to leave it there for
Page
the
number?
current year until we figure out what's a better?
What page number is that?
53.
That's a really good catch, Councilwoman. And no, we should not leave it there. To answer your question, we should move it under economic development is where we probably should move it, because it should be used for workforce development. And the closest facsimile we have to an area where that makes sense would be economic development, not youth recreation. So I strongly agree with you.
Yeah, I'm concerned though that
No, the reason.
I think it would be well overseen in economic development, because it really does need to get spent.
So the reason why I actually what page number that was on, I wanted to flip there before answering. You can see that Williams International Education Fund, $150,000 projected activity for fiscal year 21-22.
Okay.
That is not carried forward into the new budget.
So it's already been zeroed out for recreation.
Correct.
Right.
Should we see it in economic development already, or does it need to be manifested there?
It will need to be manifested there.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Any objection to Williams International manifesting an economic development? I think there's consensus on that, and it's not presently represented there.
Yeah, okay.
Councilman Parker? I need to leave. Oh, he needs to leave. All right. Thank you for your time tonight. Pro Tem Carrington.
Yes, I think that's a good point, the Williams International, but have you guys thought about how you're going to utilize that for training?
Actually, we don't have a full plan yet, but we are actually meeting with Williams International to discuss what their thoughts were, so that we are actually, what we do is in line with what they had actually wished for how the money was to be spent.
All right, thank you. And my second question, I know that we haven't got to that, but I guess it's a good time to talk about it now, concerning the Bloomfield Hills project. What was it, the Bloomfield?
Village at Broomfield, 425.
Yes. Have you guys had any follow-up with that particular company concerning money that was left on the table concerning training?
We have not yet had follow-up with the company, but we have had follow-up internal conversations and have actually looked at the specifics of that requirement. And the short answer to that question, in terms of what is actually required, is that the development company is required to pay up to $2 million if they have not provided a sufficient amount of dollars to hiring Pontiac residents or to contracting with Pontiac-based businesses. So that's actually what the requirement is. We are looking at trying to obtain information from the company to document what they've actually done in terms of paying Pontiac-based businesses for work done at Bloomfield Park, Village of Bloomfield now, or what they've done in terms of hiring Pontiac-based businesses. We directed the city attorney to make that inquiry with them, but I don't know that we've gotten a report in terms of what he has ascertained in that regard. So this is an important reminder to follow up with him. Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you, Mayor.
I'd also like to ask, do we have a way to track, do we have a method of tracking these businesses when they say they're going to hire X number of Pontiac residents? Do we have a tracking mechanism for that?
So we don't have a tracking mechanism for that, and in one of the next subcommittee meetings, if you want to go further into depth in that, I can give you some ideas on things that we can track, things that are easier to track, and things, ways that we can better hold them accountable to what they say they're going to do.
Thank you. On page 62, we've got copier lease has appeared for the Ruth Peterson Senior Center, and then a few pages afterward, the same 1,600 for the copier lease at the Bowen Senior Center. I don't think we need to discuss that further. Just wanted to flag that that is a change. There is also a change as it relates to medical insurance, page 63 for the Bowen Senior Center, going from 1,300 to essentially almost 22,000. I imagine that was just sort of catching a calculation that should have been there already. And now I'm looking back at Ruth Peterson if we have the same issue or not. Looks like that was already budgeted in there. Councilwoman James?
Also on page 63, under salaries and wages, they went up from 33 to 100,457. Can somebody explain that?
Yeah, so we had an incorrect number. If you look previously, we were at 67.5. And going back on this, we were adding an employee and trying to allocate that, and I got some numbers mixed up. Should have added when it ended up subtracting, so that's why the number went down. And so the correct number is 100,000. We have, as you may recall, we have 4 employees split between the 2 centers, but we added a senior center manager. Was the change that was made in the within the senior services fund. So before we didn't have a manager, and now we're proposing to have a manager that will manage the overall department or fund, along with the existing 3 employees.
I know Councilman Nicholson, I want to recognize him next, but just I have a follow-up question on that to help me better understand. I know the 2 individuals that work at the Ruth Peterson Senior Center right now, do they have different classifications, or do they have the same current classification and the same current compensation?
Correct. They are all listed as the same classification, and so what we are proposing to do is to create a position so that you actually have one person who is going to actually be actively overseeing all of the senior centers, because what's happening now is Ruth Peterson is on an island by itself, and there is no one who's actually in charge. They just show up and work. And Bowen Center is on an island by itself. No one is actually in charge. They just show up and work.
Yeah, I get that, and that's good, and I think that'll be structurally a stronger position for the citizens and for those employees. I'm just trying to wrap my mind around, so we got 4 human beings working for the city, 2 at Bowens, 2 at Peterson. Are they part-time?
Full-time.
Full-time? What are they making?
It's here.
So we have 4 employees. 3 are, I believe it's senior center specialists.
Yeah, $35,457 each.
And then the 4th is a senior support at a little less than that, about 34,000.
Okay. So I just want to make note of that for us. That's 212-814-702 for Bowens and 813-702 for Peterson. Councilwoman James, on that same point?
Yes. When you say you're adding a senior center manager, are you adding a 5th position?
No, ma'am.
Is that what?
We are going to take one of the positions and reclassify them as a management position.
Okay.
And then post for a 5th position? Or?
No. The existing individuals would
That presumes
presume.
that presumes that one of the existing individuals is hired in that management position.
Yeah.
If one of the existing individuals is not hired in that position, we'll look at whether we actually need a manager plus 4. Our suspicion is, and this is sort of what you just alluded to, President McInnes, that we really don't need 4 full-time people plus a manager.
I was also just trying to get a sense on if we were compensating them adequately. That was also part of where I was getting at. Councilman Nicholson is next, then Goodman.
I want to point out, I know in the conversation with 50th District Court, we talked about lawn mowing, and there's some back and forth questions. It looks like we did adjust that. So there's $1,500 now in contractual mowing services for the District Court, which is good.
Which page?
That is on page 89.
89, okay.
And then there is, I have a question regarding, it looks like we did put in some of the final numbers for employee medical insurance. Looks like that's more the broad category. Are these estimates or are these final numbers from a broker for the next plan year?
Those have to be estimates.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think they're probably modest. Did that estimate come from the broker, or is that a
Which page are you on?
112? We went from 1.43 to 1.49.
Yeah, so
I'm seeing double-digit
so
increases coming back with all of my groups.
you know, we are on a calendar year, so
So that's only partial year.
that's
Okay.
only part
I
of
got
the
it.
year. So we did add a 4% increase.
4.
But you know, again, the remainder of the year will
Who's
be
the
at the
major
current
medical
rate.
provider right now?
It's or you mean the healthcare provider, or the consultant?
Major medical provider.
Blue Cross.
Yeah. Okay. I think we should maybe just ask the broker if 4% is
Will do.
what we should be using. They would know best.
And that would be, we're talking about 659,854,716.000
Right.
medical insurance
Yep.
on page 112. Legislative Council Sharp, is that in relation to that item?
Actually, yet, well, it's on page 90. Just a quick question with the professional services snow removal. Just curious why it was reduced to 7,500 when the activity through 4/30 is 9,500.
So some of the expectation is with the increase in employees in DPW that we'll be able to now do some of that service in-house. So a combination of reducing the contractor and in-house services.
The one I have next is on 66. So so that way we can kind of keep trying to go in the order, is sanitation collection. So a very dramatic jump in salaries and wages. But then also, that's page 66. And then page 67 looks like a positive modification that we're expecting. Well, maybe it's not positive. But hit me with the salaries and wages. What can we attribute that to?
So we have hired a few, in addition to the allocation, there are some specific employees who are going to be dedicated to the sanitation and fund that are going to be working directly on that. So, you know, it's a combination of allocation of a percent of workers in DPW that are working across multiple departments, but then we also have some proposed employees that will specifically be working on, basically on a full-time basis for this department and for this fund.
So as part of the sense of trying to book or correlate so that the sanitation fund is where the resources for those positions are
Correct.
generated? Okay.
Yes, yep, tied to the specific fund.
Got it.
Exactly.
On that same note, Pro Tem Carrington?
So you increased this fund, but did you reduce the other funds that you take in these employees?
Well, in this case,
mostly
these
out
are
of?
in this case these are new employees. So these are new folks within the DPW department. So in that sense, they aren't necessarily coming they're not an expense that is currently on the books. They're new employees, and this is the first time that they would be within the budget.
So I guess I heard you wrong then. I don't know if the rest of the council, did he, I thought you said that you was using other DPW folks.
No, I'm saying
in
it's a combination. Previously, much of the cost that was stuff that was being allocated. In addition to the allocation, we also have people who are going to be working basically on a full-time basis. So it's now a combination of people who are almost entirely dedicated to the sanitation fund, along with people who are have some small percentage or some fraction of their time.
Do you
That's
know
being dedicated.
how many new staff as well as those salaries?
So I don't have the.
I have so there's a superintendent and then 2 sanitation maintenance workers that are listed as new on their org chart. Their salaries, if they included them, they're, I can't tell for sure. Oh, wait.
Councilman Nichols, is that in the old?
Yeah,
they
it's
gave
in the
us already?
white binder. It'd be towards the end, maybe the last 2 pages. You'll find that, but then in the beginning are the org charts. And DPW's has them in red boxes as the new staff.
Sanitation.
Moving ahead, the page 69 is cable. I just see that 12,000 has appeared for training. That's already been spoken to in terms of them doing that across the board for employees as a standard formula. Page 78, Brownfield Redevelopment Authority, current property tax. That's, I imagine, just manifesting what should have been there.
Yeah.
Correct,
So
Aaron?
yeah. So I know we did update the projected tax revenue from that. I'm not sure what page you're on, but for that Brownfield,
That was page 78.
78. Yes. Yep. So we included that's a projection on the income, the property tax for next year that was added into there.
I'm still going through line by line, and I'm at 81, but I know Councilman Goodman had something on 89.
So I have a couple, but I guess we'll go to the one that's closest on 89, which is it would be the line item for contractual janitorial services, the increase of 55,000. Well, the creation of that number right there.
And you're on page 89, Councilman?
Yes. It would be the second to last line
Oh,
item.
yes. Yeah, so, we haven't had any activity that's hit the books yet. We have talked with the DPW director, and we know we need to get in there and better understand how the bills are being paid. And, I fully expect that those costs are in the system. They're just not getting allocated to the court properly. Because as was communicated, obviously the work is being done there. So we did make sure to include some funding in the budget for the upcoming fiscal year.
Okay. So there was that one. Do you mind if I jump around, Michael? It's going backwards.
Yeah, keep going. Although so 89 and 90, it was already flagged previously that the changes in snow removal line items and mowing services as well to account for that. Keep going.
To hop back just a little bit, if we go to, let me make sure I have the right one.
Is it 23?
Well, so one of them is 29, and again, this could have possibly been me not listening as closely as I should while looking for things to flag. The salary increase for redevelopment and housing, was that touched on already?
No.
Good call.
So
that is an increase of 100,000.
correct. So we added a director in that position. If you recall, and I think the deputy mayor can kind of explain the structure of that, but that $100,000 is specifically tied to one employee being added in addition to what had been previously in the budget.
Okay. And again,
Well, why don't we allow the deputy mayor to explain that? This is the community development director, I believe. Is that accurate? So, as I think everyone is aware, and as we discussed previously, we're looking at creating a larger department structure that will be a community development department, headed by, of course, a community development department director with 3 divisions within it: a building and safety department, a economic development department, and a planning department. Thank you. I knew I was forgetting one of them. And I shouldn't say departments because they're part of the community development department, so they'd be divisions. So a building division, a economic development division, and a planning division. That much we articulated previously. However, when we listed the positions on the separate sheet, the position of community development department director was omitted. And that salary and associated costs for that position's compensation was also omitted.
okay. And then the last one that I had is on page 23, which would be the line item for salaries and wages, which did not previously exist and now has almost $14,000 in it.
So fire department.
Yep.
Yeah, so that update came from the DPW, and they gave us a detailed breakdown just in terms of the estimate, and that reflects some of the work that they have to do in maintaining the firehouses and the stations and the building maintenance and related activities for that.
All right, thank you.
Other council members with items flagged from the difference from the May recommended budget and the corrected, or the more explicit, I don't know. 2.0, mayor's budget 2.0, how about that? I've gone through and we've addressed all the ones that I've seen. I do not have any material concerns about the changes that have been incorporated. I did make note of the medical insurance, so that way if we want to collectively come back and see if there's a more explicit moving target we want to aim for. But other council colleagues, are there any changes that they made that we are extremely concerned about? Councilwoman James.
I wouldn't say extremely concerned, but I am extremely grateful for the new format. It is much easier to read, just visually a better.
So noted.
A
Yep.
better format, and I appreciate it greatly. Thank you.
Well, you're welcome, and I have to say, Councilwoman, forgive me, I'm being
Oh,
out
yeah,
of
you have the
order.
floor, yes.
I'm sorry. I have to say, I felt the same way when I saw this, and I thought, boy, if only I had had the imagination to know this was possible before, I would have requested it months ago. So I am very grateful to the deputy mayor or Mr. Carrington, whoever came up with it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Council, any other concerns about the items that have been in the 2.0 version from the mayor's budget?
I do have just a
yes.
general question. Just a general question concerning the cemeteries. So is the DPW actually cutting that grass at Ottawa as well as Oak Hill, or is that done by the contracting companies that we have?
So your question is very timely because just today I was reviewing the contract with the cemetery contractor, and I also reviewed the old contract with the previous cemetery contractor, and there's some very important differences between those two contracts. But our contract with the current contractor, which is obviously the relevant contract as we sit here, does in fact require the contractor covenant to mow the grass. That's very clear, and I don't think there's any dispute about that. It also requires Covenant to trim the bushes and small trees. But it also very clearly requires the city to cut and remove dead or unviable trees that aren't small in nature, at least. And it also very clearly requires the city to perform the road maintenance. Those last two provisions are in stark contrast, actually, to the old agreement and contract with Detroit Memorial. Thank you. That contract actually required the contractor to, or it was a little ambiguous, but seemed to suggest that the contractor was responsible for cutting and removing trees and maintaining the roads. But the current contract clearly puts those requirements, other than small trees, on the city. But the contractor, Covenant, is responsible for mowing the grass.
Well, thank you. And that means by looking at our current ordinances that these companies are required to go all the way down to the curve, right? And how they cut the grass at these particular.
That is my interpretation, and your text yesterday is one of, or maybe it was 2 days ago, but your text within the past couple of days is one of the reasons I was reviewing their contract. And so my interpretation is that that is Covenant's responsibility, not the city's responsibility.
Well, definitely if you guys could follow up with that, because right now half the grass is cut, and then all around the cemetery half the grass is not cut. So what's left as though is the city's responsibility to.
Yes, and I have a meeting with the representative of Covenant coming up next week, which is the broader context in which I was reviewing the contract, so that I know what I'm talking about when I meet with her. But the other reason why I was reviewing the contract is I know we've discussed at great length the question about the roads, and of course I wanted to confirm that that is in fact the city's responsibility, and it is. While I'm on the topic of various Tim Greimel homework assignments that I was engaged in today, one of those was a conversation I had with Oakland County Animal Control, and I have left my notes in my office about the conversation, but the high-level summary of it is as follows. Oakland County Animal Control does provide a variety of free services to Pontiac. Those services include Monday through Friday, and I see Monique's not here, neither is Lynette. I know that they have had their perceptions of the answers here. But Oakland County Animal Control does provide a pretty robust array of services regarding dogs, Monday through Friday, 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. In fact, they provide 2 full-time, 40-hour animal control officers just for the city of Pontiac during those hours, free of charge to the city of Pontiac. And so those officers will do basically anything you can, well, I want to be careful. Most of what you can imagine regarding dogs during those hours. They will respond to and collect any feral dogs, which is to say, dogs that have gone wild, or any other dogs that are roaming the streets unaccompanied by people. So any stray dogs during those hours on those days, they will respond to and corral, if you will. Incidentally, they will also do the same for livestock, which obviously is not really an issue here in Pontiac, but for service,
knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on wood. But they will also do the same for livestock. They will not do that for cats or any other animals, just to be clear.
Possum, skunk.
Yes.
Yeah.
They will respond during those time period hours for any wild animal that is in somebody's house. Now, it has to be living quarters. If it's in your garage, I don't think they'll respond.
Or attic.
Or attic. That's a good point. But they will respond if an animal is in the house, as my mom experienced with a wild squirrel in her house 3 years ago, incidentally. They will also respond to any dog bite or any other animal bite, wild or domestic,
During those hours.
during those hours. Now, they will also respond during those hours or after hours, because there is one animal control officer who is available after hours, basically 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But response times can be lengthy because they are responding from their home, just to be clear.
Throughout the whole county?
Yes. Most of them live in Oakland County, but there are a couple that live in other counties. They will respond to any report of animal neglect or abuse. They will also respond during, again, any time, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, to any situation where law enforcement calls them to respond to a situation. That could include if they arrest somebody who has an animal in the car, for example, situations like that. They will always respond, although it may not be immediately, to a situation involving a animal that has bitten somebody. Now, during those business hours, 5 days a week, they will respond immediately to any animal bite. But if it's after hours or over the weekend, they will respond the next business day to those situations. When it comes to feral cats, essentially stray cats, but this is an important distinction. Not cats that are domesticated and well cared for that escape and have been out for a week. We're talking about cats that have really gone back to the wild, and most of which have been born in the wild. So these are essentially wild animals for all
You can feel free to sit in a chair, Director Carrington. Don't feel like you've got to be in the hot seat.
When it comes to feral cats, they will not come and collect them. However, if a resident traps them, which is not an easy proposition because these are essentially wild animals, but you can use live traps that lure feral cats into them, and you take them to animal control. Animal control will spay them at no cost to the person bringing them in, and will return them to the person bringing them in the same cage to be released again into the wild. That is now the recommended protocol for controlling feral cat populations. You really can't take a feral cat, which is, again, in essence, a wild animal, and adopt it out to a family. But what they do, rather than euthanizing the cats, which would be the other alternative, is spay or neuter them and return them to the wild. Now, they won't collect them and do it, but they'll do the medical procedure free of charge. The other thing that they'll do is they do administer dog licenses. And the other thing that they will do is they will take a dog, and I think cats, but don't quote me on that, if somebody wants to turn them in. If a person, for whatever reason, they don't have the time to take care of the dog or cat, they don't have the money to take care of the dog or cat, you can drop your dog or cat off at the shelter. Now, they do charge a $22 fee for that, just FYI, or maybe it's $23, but you can do that. If somebody doesn't have the financial means to take care of the dog or cat, and that's why they're doing it, they did say that they will work with people to try to help them obtain the financial means to take care of the animal, which presumably is cheaper for them than having to take in the animal. So that's the crux of what I know. It may not be everything because I don't have my notes in front of me, but that's the crux of what I've learned about Oakland County Animal Control.
What were they willing to dance in terms of beyond the prescribed hours to if we ponied up for it?
I did pose that question. I said, are you willing to contract with communities for more robust services? And they said that they personally would be willing to do so, but there is not an existing system or program in place to allow for contracting. So ultimately it would be, as they said, a decision above their pay grade.
Okay. Bob Gatt?
Yeah, I talked with Bob Gatt.
Oh, okay. So it's about his.
Yeah, yeah. There you go. No wonder he went into animal control. So I talked directly with Bob Gatt. He had a couple of staffers with him, but he really did most of the talking, and they were.
So the decision to contract is above the.
Yeah, it would be something that the county commission would have to approve, because currently there is no arrangement or program to allow for contracting for any municipality. That's
Well,
right.
A+ on that Tim Greimel homework assignment. My hope was that we'd be able to today itemize the changes that the council wishes to see, but we are on the verge of losing quorum, so we
Yep.
won't be able to. Yes, I gave him consent so he could go to his son's recital. So
Oh, okay.
I will be doing roll call.
Well, and I've been far too robust, but your question about the cemeteries reminded me that I had done some homework today to report to the council about these topics.
Very
so I wanted
relevant.
to
Very
document
relevant.
with you.
Very relevant. So what the game plan is that at 5 o'clock tomorrow, come locked and loaded with the laundry list of council originated changes that you're proposing. And tomorrow, hopefully, we'll be able to at least have a working understanding of each of yours and, a specific dollar amount. So that way that the mayor and administration has from now until Tuesday to do some homework further homework in case there's any disconnect or what gives kind of situation. We may be able to make some decisions to say, okay, it's very clear that can go into what's going to be the first reading, so to speak, on Tuesday the 14th, or it might be a situation where we're then going to have amendment marathon if there's not real consensus between all the parties, and there may be, it's okay to not have unanimous votes, but the majority will rule, and it will go item by item if we have to. This is very helpful. I think that we covered a lot of territory. I have a very clear understanding as a council member of where we are at with the mayor's budget 2.0, and tomorrow, and let me know if you have a hard end at 7, because it may go beyond 7 if your schedules allow, but the party's over for today because quorum's about to be over. There were no requests for public comment, and there is no public here to comment presently. Is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Support.
It's been moved by Nicholson and seconded by Carrington, to adjourn the meeting. Hearing no discussion. Did you have a point you wanted to make?
I don't.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm just very attentive to
Oh.
council this evening. On the edge of my seat.
On adjournment, Nicholson. McGinnis is a yes. Carrington.
Yes.
James.
Yes.
That motion carries. We stand adjourned at 7:20 p.m. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thanks for your great comments.